Picture this for a moment. It's a Tuesday night. Your kitchen light is on, but the room feels strangely hollow. There are groceries in the fridge, but you still order food. Your phone is in your hand, and your thumb moves almost automatically. To confirm. Done. Feels small. Almost invisible. A little convenience. A little reward. A little relief at the end of a long day. But now zoom out. Not just one night. Not just one order. Watch the pattern over a month, then a year. Watch the same motion repeat under slightly different names. Delivery. Subscription. Upgrade. Impulse buy. Faster shipping. Better version. Tiny reset. Digital comfort. This is how many people become financially stressed without ever feeling like they made one catastrophic decision. Their money doesn't disappear through drama. It disappears through loops. That's the part most people miss. Financial stress is rarely born from one giant mistake alone. Yes, a medical emergency can shake a life. A job loss can devastate a household. A bad debt decision can leave scars for years. But before the major crisis arrives, long before the obvious collapse, many people are already living inside a hidden spending loop that quietly weakens them from the inside. They feel under pressure all the time, yet they struggle to point to the exact cause. They assume life is just expensive now. They assume adulthood simply feels like this. They assume everyone is running on the same low-grade financial panic. But what they often call normal life is actually a loop that keeps converting emotion into spending and spending into more emotion. The loop usually begins in a place that doesn't look financial at all. It begins in the body, in fatigue, in boredom, in frustration, in loneliness, in that peculiar emptiness that appears after too many responsibilities and too little internal space. You feel depleted, so you look for frictionless relief. Not because you are irresponsible, because you are human. You want something easy. Something immediate. Something that changes the texture of the moment. So you spend. A meal you didn't plan. A purchase you didn't need. A premium option because you're too tired to think. A little "I deserve this" hidden inside a clean, ordinary day. The problem is not that these decisions exist. The problem is that they begin forming a loop. Here is what the loop looks like in its simplest form. First, you feel stress or internal discomfort. Second, you spend money to soften it. Third, the spending gives you a brief emotional release. Fourth, the spending weakens your margin. Fifth, lower margin creates more financial stress. Then the cycle begins again. The reason this is so dangerous is because each stage disguises the next. The relief feels like a solution. The financial impact feels small. The stress that follows feels unrelated. So instead of seeing one continuous pattern, you experience it as separate moments. A hard day. A harmless purchase. A slightly tighter account. A bit more anxiety. Another hard day. Another harmless purchase. 100 small circles later, you're trapped inside a system that feels mysterious only because you've been forced to live it from the inside. Imagine two people with the same salary. Same city. Same age range. Same complaints about rent, groceries, and the economy. One feels chronically financially stressed. The other does not. The stressed one is not necessarily reckless. They are not throwing money at absurd luxuries every weekend. Their spending looks normal, polite, familiar, socially approved. Their stress comes from accumulation, not extravagance. They keep paying for ease because their days feel hard. They keep buying small relief because their life feels heavy. They keep upgrading tiny corners of reality because they do not want to feel stuck. The other person may spend too, but not through the same loop. Their choices happen from intention more often than emotional reflex. That difference changes everything. Most people think financial stress comes from not earning enough. Sometimes that is true. But often what keeps stress alive is not only the amount of money entering your life. It is the speed at which discomfort turns that money into something else. The more quickly your internal states trigger purchases, the less power your income has. A raise helps less than you expected. A bonus disappears faster than it should. Even good months leave little behind. It begins to feel like the salary itself is weak, when in reality the salary is being fed into a system designed to absorb it. That system is not always built by greed. Very often, it is built by exhaustion. Exhaustion is one of the least discussed financial forces in modern life. Tired people spend differently. Not because they are careless, but because depleted minds reach for shortcuts. If you are mentally flooded, your threshold for friction drops. Planning feels harder. Cooking feels harder. Comparing prices feels harder. Canceling subscriptions feels harder. Waiting feels harder. Resisting convenience feels harder. The loop loves this version of you. It loves the version of you who no longer wants the best decision, only the easiest one. And modern systems are built to meet you there. They do not wait for you to become irrational. They profit from you becoming tired. That is why the spending loop behind financial stress is often invisible. It hides behind respectable language. It does not say, "I am damaging your future." It says, "You work hard." It says, "This will make life easier." It says, "You deserve better." It says, "It's not even that much." It says, "Everyone does this." It says, "You can afford it." And maybe in a narrow moment you can. That is what makes the loop so elegant and so destructive. Each purchase can be justified in isolation. But financial stress is not created in isolation. It is created through repetition. Repetition matters more than intensity. One delivery order means little. One impulse purchase means little. One monthly subscription means little. One rideshare means little. One premium convenience means little. But your financial life is not built from one decision. It is built from recurring behavior. When the same emotional states keep producing the same spending responses, the pattern becomes architecture. Suddenly your expenses are no longer random. They are structural. Your stress isn't surprising. It is logical. Your money is moving exactly where your loop trained it to move. This is why so many people feel confused by their own finances. They say, "I'm not doing anything crazy." And they are often right. They are not buying yachts. They are not gambling away their future. They are not making obviously terrible choices. They are just living in a way that continuously trades long-term strength for short-term stabilization. A little less effort tonight. A little more comfort this week. A little more speed this month. A little more softness around the edges of a hard life. It sounds humane, and in a sense it is. But if your financial structure cannot support the level of emotional outsourcing you've normalized, the result is chronic stress that never seems to fully leave your body. The loop becomes even stronger when spending starts playing an identity role. It is no longer just about relief. It becomes about self-maintenance. You do not only buy because you are tired. You buy because you do not want to feel behind. You buy because your current version of life feels slightly outdated, slightly too small, slightly too plain. You upgrade because you want evidence that you are progressing. You spend socially because you do not want your life to look restricted. You pay for certain aesthetics, certain rhythms, certain conveniences because they reassure you that you are not failing. Now money is doing two jobs at once. It is managing your mood and protecting your self-image. That is a heavy burden for any salary to carry. This is where the loop gets cruel. Spending for relief reduces your financial margin. Reduced margin increases your background anxiety. Background anxiety increases your need for relief. More need for relief increases your spending reflex. You can see the tragedy in it. The very behavior used to reduce stress becomes one of the forces creating it. And because the relief is immediate while the financial damage is delayed, your brain keeps learning the wrong lesson. It keeps learning, "This helped." In the moment, maybe it did. But the loop does not care about the moment alone. It cares about what your repeated moments become. Financial stress is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet and elegant. It lives in the hesitation before opening your banking app. In the subtle dread when you think about the next bill. In the strange frustration of earning decent money and still feeling fragile. In the private embarrassment of realizing that your lifestyle looks more stable than it actually is. In the fact that every surprise feels too expensive. In the way one bad week can tilt the whole month. In the knowledge that even when the paycheck lands, the relief does not last long enough to feel like real safety. This is the emotional climate created by the invisible spending loop. Not poverty exactly. Not abundance. A permanent state of nearly is exhausting. Nearly comfortable. Nearly ahead. Nearly saving properly. Nearly catching up. Nearly able to breathe. That is where the loop keeps people. Because stress is not only about having too little money. It is about having too little slack. Too little space between what life costs and what your income can absorb. And every time you use spending to regulate discomfort, you narrow that space a little more. Which means the next discomfort arrives in a life already less equipped to hold it. One reason the loop is so powerful is that it attaches itself to modern convenience systems that were built to erase friction. You do not have to drive anywhere. You do not have to think too long. You do not have to compare. You do not have to pause. Everything is designed for emotional continuity. If you feel an urge, the market wants there to be almost no delay between the feeling and the financial action. That is not neutral. That is the perfect environment for a stress spending loop. Your tiredness becomes monetized. Your boredom becomes monetized. Your loneliness becomes monetized. Your low mood becomes monetized. And because the design is smooth, your mind experiences the spending as gentle, not dangerous. The loop also thrives on invisibility. It is much easier to fear one large expense than many tiny recurring ones. A single major mistake gets your attention. But invisible drains operate differently. They become background music. Delivery fees. App charges. Premium versions. Little extras. Replacement purchases. Convenience add-ons. Subscriptions you forgot to question. Emotional resets disguised as ordinary spending. None of them screams. None of them feels like the true cause. But together, they are often the hidden engine behind financial stress. If you want to understand whether this loop is running your life, ask yourself a different kind of question. Not, what do I spend on? Ask, what emotional state usually comes right before I spend mindlessly? That is where the truth hides. After work? After conflict? During boredom? When you scroll? When you feel behind? When you feel unappreciated? When the day felt too heavy and you want to soften the landing? These moments matter more than your categories. Because the loop is usually anchored to a feeling first, and only then expressed through a transaction. For one person, the loop lives in food. Every stressful day ends in delivery, snacks, coffee runs, and little purchases of reward. For another person, it lives in shopping. They buy small things to feel movement, novelty, or self-renewal. For someone else, it lives in digital subscriptions, premium tools, convenient services, and soft luxuries that make life feel more manageable. For another, it lives in social spending, in saying yes too often because no feels like shrinking. The category changes. The architecture does not. Stress seeks relief. Relief is purchased. Margin shrinks. Stress grows stronger. The loop continues. This is why some people can cut expenses for a few weeks and still find themselves back in the same pattern by the next month. They are trying to solve a loop at the transaction level while ignoring it at the emotional level. They fight the spending but not the state that drives it. They remove the purchase without replacing the function. So the discomfort builds, the urge returns, and eventually the spending comes back through a different door. A person who used to overorder food may start over-upgrading household items. A person who stops shopping may start spending more socially. If the loop remains emotionally intact, the money simply finds a new exit. Breaking the loop begins with seeing it as a loop. That sounds simple, but it changes everything. The moment you stop viewing each expense as a separate moral event and start seeing the recurring pattern, you regain leverage. Now the problem is not, I am bad with money. It becomes, I have a loop. That difference matters because loops can be studied, interrupted, redesigned, and weakened. Shame makes people vague. Pattern awareness makes them precise. And precision is where real change starts. Point one of the strongest interventions is friction. The loop depends on speed. It depends on minimal space between feeling and spending. So if you want to weaken it, you have to insert time. Not forever. Just enough to interrupt the emotional chain. Delete the apps you use in your weakest moments. Remove saved cards. Add a waiting rule to non-essential purchases. Delay the decision until tomorrow morning. Make certain behaviors less seamless. This is not because you are childish. It is because the loop is fast and fast loops speak good intentions. Slower systems give your wiser self a chance to re-enter the room. The second intervention is environmental honesty. If your life is so overloaded that money keeps getting used as emergency emotional support, then the problem is not only your spending. It is the shape of your days. Where is the friction too high? Where is the fatigue coming from? Where is the clutter? Where is the decision overload? Where are you chronically underrested, underplanned, or overexposed to pressure? Because if your daily life remains structured around depletion, your spending loop will keep regenerating. Financial stress cannot always be solved only at the level of money. Sometimes it has to be solved at the level of energy. The third intervention is identity separation. You have to learn that spending less in certain areas does not mean becoming less. A lot of financial stress survives because people unconsciously protect purchases that flatter their self-image. the nicer version, the polished version, the socially approved version, the version that helps them feel like they are progressing. So when a cost needs to go, it feels like the self is being diminished. But often what is being diminished is not your real quality of life. It is the external costume you've been funding to reassure yourself. Those are not the same thing. There is a kind of maturity that begins when you stop asking, will this feel good right now? And start asking, what does this pattern create if repeated? That is a deeper financial question. It moves you out of mood and into structure. One convenience purchase might be fine. One emotional treat might be fine. One upgrade might be harmless. But once you see the repetition, you stop being hypnotized by the innocence of single events. You begin to understand that your future is built by loops, not isolated choices. This is why the people who feel calm with money are often not the ones making the most. They are the ones whose emotional systems demand less from their income. Their salary is not constantly being asked to repair the day, restore the mood, signal growth, prove success, remove friction, and generate relief all at once. Their money gets to do fewer jobs, which means it can do each one better. It can sit. It can accumulate. It can protect. It can create optionality. It can remain visible longer into the month. That is what financial peace often is. Money no longer being used to soothe everything, and the opposite is also true. When money is expected to soothe everything, it becomes strangely weak no matter how much arrives. A raise helps, but only briefly. A good month helps, but not deeply. The loop simply adjusts to the new level and continues. More stress, more spending. Better income, better spending. Polished life, same fragility. This is why so many people feel confused after earning more. They expected the inner pressure to ease. Instead, the pressure stayed, just in a cleaner apartment with better takeout. The invisible spending loop behind financial stress is not really about greed. It is about adaptation. You adapted to hard days by paying for relief. You adapted to pressure by buying convenience. You adapted to insecurity by maintaining an image. You adapted to modern life the way many people do. The issue is that some adaptations are expensive, and expensive adaptations repeated over time become structures that quietly trap the person who needed them. That is why the loop deserves compassion and scrutiny at the same time. Compassion because it formed for a reason. Scrutiny because it is costing you more than you think. If you interrupt the loop consistently, something remarkable begins to happen. Your stress drops slightly, not because all your problems disappear, but because fewer financial aftershocks keep following your emotions. A hard day becomes just a hard day. It does not automatically become a spending event. A low mood becomes just a low mood. It does not automatically demand money to soften it. This is where real freedom begins, not in dramatic wealth, but in the quiet ability to feel something without being billed for it afterward. Over time, that changes your entire financial atmosphere. Money stays longer. Relief lasts longer. The next month starts with less damage. Your bank balance begins to feel less like a temporary performance and more like evidence of actual structure. You stop confusing tiny hits of comfort with real stability. You stop needing payday to feel rescued. The loop weakens, and with it, the strange private panic that used to trail behind your life starts to lose some of its power. The truth is simple but not easy. Financial stress often survives because spending has become one of your emotional coping systems. Until that becomes visible, the loop continues in disguise. It wears the mask of adulthood, convenience, self-care, progress, reward, and normal living. But once you see the loop clearly, it becomes harder to obey it blindly. And that is the beginning of change. Not perfection. Not instant transformation. Just the moment you realize that your money was never only leaving because life is expensive. It was leaving because stress kept teaching it where to go. So the next time you feel that impulse, that small inner pull toward quick relief, pause long enough to ask a better question. Not, can I buy this? Not even, do I deserve this? Ask, what loop am I feeding right now? Because that question reaches deeper than the purchase itself. It reaches the pattern. And once you start protecting yourself at the level of pattern, your finances begin to change in a way that feels less dramatic but much more powerful. You stop fighting single transactions. You start redesigning the system. And that is the real shift. People think financial peace arrives when income finally gets big enough. Sometimes it does help. But often peace arrives when the loop loses its grip. When your stress no longer has automatic spending privileges. When convenience stops being your default answer to depletion. When your identity needs less external maintenance. When your relief becomes cheaper, calmer, and less dependent on transactions. That is when money begins to stay. That is when financial stress begins to loosen. And that is when you finally understand the thing most people never see. The invisible loop was never small. It was the architecture behind the whole feeling. If this video helped you see the pattern more clearly, subscribe and stay with me. The difference between pressure and peace often begins with what you finally stop normalizing.